Welcome to the Hidden Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove, and today we're going to be talking about when to stand firm or pivot and the tension that every leader must face. And we're going to talk about how it's not really always easy to be able to tell the difference. You've heard the sayings like, don't compromise, stand your ground, and that is true, but we should also hold tightly to truth, the humbling truth that there are also times where humility calls us to make a shift, and whether it's in our approach, our understanding, our perspective, but both are pretty important. So how do you be able to tell the difference? And that's what we're going to be unpacking today. How to discern when to stay planted and when to pivot, and without losing your integrity or your grace. So let's talk about strength in standing. And these are the moments that are non-negotiable. These are values and convictions that are worth fighting for. And as a leader, your voice and your example matters. People are watching how you respond to pressure, and when you compromise, when you compromise what matters most just to keep peace or to please people, and you can lose your credibility, and the mission loses clarity. So here's some examples of things worth standing firm on. Things like your core values. Those are these unchanging truths within your organization that are things that not just printed on put on a website or printed on the wall, but they should be values within your character. For example, core values of ours as a church is love is an action and a choice. And so it's like these are for our church or ministry, but it's not this mushy-gushy idea. It's this idea that we don't just say that we love others. We have to be able to show it with our actions and our choices. And there's many times where we go back to this simple value. Or another value we have is victory happens with transparency. And so if we're a transparent community and there's somebody that comes and says, I feel kind of offensive that people are so open about their struggles, which has happened before. Well, that is a core value that is specific to our group, our community. And so that is something that we could offer more clarity on, or maybe share perspectives, or maybe talk around it. But at the end of the day, this value is true to us and it's not going to change. And especially if you're a Christian, there's biblical truths that you should stand firm on. For example, for me, going to recovery centers, I go to secular recovery centers, so they're not Christian based. And there's as I share different talks, I am my whole purpose there is to provide spiritual exploration and healing through these different talks. And within the talk, I make it inclusive, where I might use language like your higher power, how you see God, etc. But I make it abundantly clear that for me, I'm a Christian, and I see the doorway to my higher power or to God through Jesus Christ. And I make it abundantly clear that's something I believe in. I'm not trying to force you to believe what I believe, but it's a value that I hold strictly to, where I'm not embarrassed or shy or hide it in effort to be non-confrontational. Things like your integrity, your calling or assignment from God, how people are treated with dignity and honor. These are things that are worth standing on. And standing firm doesn't mean being loud. It's not about being combative. It means that you have these roots, and within these roots, you're not necessarily reactive, but it's like I am unshakable. It doesn't mean that I'm not unteachable, but it means that your roots go deep enough that you're not just blown over by every opinion, but you're still open to growth. And it's really, I think it's kind of surprising of the minute that we step into leadership roles, it's really surprising of how crazy people get. I was just talking to somebody else about this the other day. It's like, as soon as you go into a leadership role, you realize it seems like almost everybody goes crazy. And you have so many scenarios and so many situations that test you and make you feel almost confused. Like so many situations that come up where you honestly think I never would have imagined that this would be something brought up to me. And you have to really determine and decide what is my roots, what is something that I'm going to be unshakable on, and what is something that I'm going to be flexible with. And so now let's talk about the power of pivoting. It's these are the moments when what's needed most is a pivot, not a retreat, or not a compromise, but a humble, honest shift. And I think that sometimes we confuse stubbornness with strength. Real strength includes the ability to say, I was wrong and I've learned something new, or I need to change my approach. Being a minister for the last 15 years and a public speaker, there's been many times where I've run into situations where I've been doing it this way for a pretty long time, but then running into something that surprised me, where a certain group of people just reacted completely different. Even just like I shared earlier, going to recovery centers, that I had a normal kind of like introduction that I would do at every recovery center, and it genuinely was fine. I never ran into any backlash over it. And then at 1 month, it was just like one specific recovery center was just putting up this huge wall that was just I could not get past. And I didn't understand what had happened. It's not that I started doing something wrong per se, but I realized that there's something I could have done better. And just from that experience, I pivoted, and now I start every talk with like an introduction that sets up a framework for the talk I'm going to give, and it gives like this disarming nature to the people I'm about to talk to, and it's like just something that I added. I never had to do it for years past, but once I ran into it, I was able to make this pivot and change. And I think that if we were to take this simple philosophy, we'd be able to realize times where we misunderstood a situation, or maybe you've simply grown and now see things differently. There's so many times, especially within churches, we need to recognize the moments that we need to pivot. You know, there's so many times where we are trying to control something instead of trust God, or we're so married to the method or the model that we're using, even though it's no longer effective. And in those moments, we are holding on to pride more than purpose. I just heard this I saw this random reel the other day from, oh man, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was not a friendly individual. He's a really like well-known preacher guy, but it was just a video of him pretty much saying that he's so sick and tired of people talking about church hurt, and that if he hears it again, he's going to throw up in his mouth, and that it's not about being hurt by church, about someone told you shouldn't do something when you shouldn't have done something. And there's this idea like, I'm right, the leader is always right, and if you're hurt by church, it's because you're being a baby. And it was so just like unsettling. It was like, to me, it was like gross, because after being so long in church ministry, there's been plenty of times where it's just at the end of the day, people make mistakes, especially in leadership. And that mindset is like, well, it's not my fault, it's your fault. It's just not productive. That is so obvious that you are holding on to pride more than purpose, because the purpose of the church is to reach people. And if you are inevitably hurting people instead of reaching people, then maybe that's a time to pivot. And there's, I think that maybe in like the 90s, early 2000s, that hard, solid approach, like you just need to get over it, may have worked for that generation. But the next generation is different. And now we have things like mental health. It's like there's so much a different capacity of how people are able to resonate with thoughts and ideas and emotions than previous generations. And rather than just saying they need to grow up, well, I think that we as a church should adapt and pivot. And it's this idea that you have to accept that pivoting isn't weakness. It's leadership that is self-aware. It's leadership that is willing to surrender to what needs to be done. And there are times when the strongest thing that you can do is shift your position to stay aligned with truth, not tradition. And it takes a humble pill to swallow. But again, personally for me, I feel like over the years, there's been so many things where I thought I was right at the beginning. And over time, I realized this was wrong. In fact, this was even unhealthy, what I was holding on to. It was not benefiting the organization. It was just feeding my ego. And so again, it's about settling down and knowing when I should stand firm on certain beliefs, on character values, and when I need to pivot and recognize that this is my pride, not my purpose. So to kind of finish this off, how to know which one you're facing. It's how to discern whether you stand or pivot. Try asking yourselves these kinds of questions. Is this about principle or preference? Do you just prefer to do it this way? Do you just feel like it's better? Is it rooted in a core value, a biblical truth? If it's just a method or a style or tradition or like how fits you, it might be time to pivot. Another thing to ask yourself, am I protecting truth or just protecting my pride? Sometimes we're just afraid of looking wrong or losing control. Another question, would I be okay if someone else did this differently? I think that it really reveals our stance about our conviction or our comfort when we look at it from those kinds of perspectives. And finally, have I invited wise voices into this decision? Rather than just saying like, no, it's my way. I know it's right. I don't have to talk to anybody about it. Just maybe not make that decision alone. Get some counsel from other mature, grounded people, reasonable people who care more about God's will than your ego. And I think that Jesus, he models this for us. It's so beautiful in how we can look at Jesus and see that he stood firm on truth, even when it cost him popularity and comfort. But he also pivoted in ways that shocked people. Healing on the Sabbath, redefining what leadership looked like, extending grace where others expected to be punished. And it's this idea that Jesus never compromised on truth, but he constantly was challenging these assumptions. And I think that that's kind of leader we all want to be, and one who is bold when it matters, but humble when it's needed. And all that to say too, I'm referencing Jesus as this great leader we can aspire to also know that he still dealt with plenty of people that did not like his leadership. He was a perfect leader, and he still had a Judas. And there's still people that judged him and contradicted what he was saying, and felt like he was wrong. So it's not about, we're not going to please everybody, never. But the bottom line is that there's some hills that are worth dying on, and others are just familiar places that we've gotten too comfortable standing on. As a leader, your growth isn't just about knowing what to say, it's about knowing when to stand and when to surrender your grip for the sake of a bigger purpose. The goal isn't always to be right, the goal is always to be aligned with truth, with your purpose, with what the organization is meant for. And even spiritually, like what God is calling you to do. So with all that being said, I hope that this message was meaningful for you today. I hope that made a difference in your life. Could you do me a favor? Leave me a rating and review for this podcast. It helped me out, help others to see this show in their feed. But until next time, have a great life. Well, there you have it. I hope that this episode was meaningful and edifying for your leadership and your growth within your ministry and organization. Could you do me a favor? Could you leave a rating and review for this podcast? It'd really help me out and help others be able to see this show in their feed. You can also visit homerhargrove.com to be able to learn more, connect, or become one of our supporters. Until next time, have a great life.